Hello everyone. So this is a lecture video talking about the environmental systems and the scientific basis about our environmental problems. So in this slide, what is being shown to you is the relationship between our ecosystem in this case, right? So the ecosystem is made up of multiple things, okay? So obviously ecosystem is composed of biotic or living components and abiotic, which are living components. Now, ecosystems provide a service to humans. All right. So again, this services can be shown here as four different services. It cannot. This services are also shown in this figure as this all of this different forms of services. These services, okay, are facilitated through natural capitals. And when we're talking about natural capitals, we're talking about lands or our planet's resources: air, water, soil, minerals, etc. Okay, so very, very important. And obviously, all of these resources start from the sun, solar energy. So again, without the sun, life on the planet will cease to exist. Okay, so we're going to expand a little bit further about services here, about this four types of services. So this type of services tells you the actual effects of those services: population control, climate control, so on and so forth. But those services can actually be classified or categorized into four specific services. Okay. Now, the most important services are supporting services, because without supporting services, all of these other services will not be present, because without supporting services, which is nutrient recycling, and we're going to be talking about nutrient recycling pretty soon. Primary productivity, we're talking about plants in this case. Without this supporting services, again, obviously humans, which is we are the ones who are getting the services, we will not be getting any of the services. Okay. Also, we have provisioning services. Provisioning services, in this case, food is provisioning services. Okay, without food, obviously we will not live. We actually also have regulating services, and regulating services in this case is about feedback mechanisms in the environment. One example of regulating services, obviously, is in this case temperature regulation. So how can we keep the fluctuations in temperatures within narrow limits, right? So that we actually don't undertake this sudden 50 degrees in one day and then the next day 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, and obviously there's cultural services, and cultural services are actually in this case primarily spiritual services. Okay, so how do you go, what's the purpose of hiking? What's the purpose of viewing photos of, in this case, of natural landscapes? Those can be deemed as cultural services. Okay, but again, the most important thing here is supporting services, and we're going to be talking about supporting services in more detail in the next PowerPoint slides. So what is the basis of supporting services? The basis, again, of supporting services, especially for humans, is they are necessary and essential for life. Okay, and the cycle of life between all living creatures can actually be shown by this photosynthesis and cellular respiration slide. And in a very short, very brief picture here, plants create glucose or other carbon-based compounds, and glucose is a form of sugar, but it's not just sugar, it's also proteins, it's also in this case is also fats, okay, nucleic acids, and most importantly oxygen, right? So animals cannot live without this form of energy, okay, and oxygen. Obviously oxygen is a very, very important thing for animals. In turn, animals create carbon dioxide and water, and this carbon dioxide is actually essential for plants to actually live as well. So it's kind of like the circle of life, if you think about it. All right. I'm going to give you, however, a heartbreaking news. There is actually enough carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and there's enough water on the planet, that the carbon dioxide and water that we create, animals, humans, and other animals included, is actually not essential for, in this case for like plant life. However, eventually there's going to be a time in which the carbon dioxide levels are going to decrease, and obviously plants are going to feel that impact. So the impacts of not having animals or not having plants takes time to actually directly affect humans in this case. All right. Mental note here: even though it's shown here that plants only have chloroplasts and only undertake photosynthesis, plants also have mitochondria. So plants can actually do both. They can actually do photosynthesis as well as cellular respiration. So hypothetically, animals are not needed on the planet for life to continue. Okay, so again, this is the cycle in which we, animals and plants, are somewhat related. Okay, so I'm just going to go back here. We're talking about carbon dioxide, water, glucose. Glucose is just a form of carbon compounds, and oxygen. So there are three primary compounds shown here: carbon dioxide, water, and oxygen. Those three substances, as well as other substances, are in this case cycled through the planet, and that is called a biogeochemical cycle. And the reason why it's called biogeochemical cycle is because it transitions between living organisms, bio, and non-living portions of the planet called geo, and it transitions between these two states, living and non-living, or biotic versus abiotic, is chemical. So that's why this is called biogeochemical cycle. Alright, so here is an example of a biogeochemical cycle. So the compound, any compound, whether it's oxygen, water, carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, okay, hydrogen, whatever you want to think about, enters the food chain. The plants take this nutrient, and obviously the plants are consumed by consumers, and these consumers are consumed by other consumers depending on trophic levels. Eventually these things die, right? And then what happens is decomposers, bacteria and fungi, break down this material that's inside these two living systems, and that is how they return back to the abiotic reservoir or the geological realm. So when we talk about abiotic reservoir, we're talking about three main reservoirs. We're talking about the air, we're talking about, in this case, the soil or the crust or the mantle, however one you want to think about, land mass, and obviously the third most important abiotic reservoir is water, so oceans, lakes, streams. All right, and there's a bunch of changes that occurs in abiotic reservoirs, and again, anytime you see a pathway that basically connects, anytime you see an arrow, all of those changes, all of those arrows are actually chemical in nature. All right, so the geologic processes are mechanical, physical, and chemical in nature. All right, so this is a generalized biogeochemical cycle. So just make sure that you understand what the transitions are between the biological realm and the transition between the biological and the geological or the abiotic realm. Okay, so I'm going to cover an example here very quickly, and this is the carbon cycle. So carbon is in three abiotic areas. It's in the atmosphere, okay, which actually makes up the least amount of carbon dioxide, in bodies of water, which makes up the second biggest, in this case, reservoir of abiotic carbon. But the biggest storage form of carbon dioxide, of abiotic carbon dioxide, is actually in the crust, in the actual solid component of the planet. Okay, so what happens is, obviously carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which actually comes from plants and animals as well, okay, is taken up and actually converted into glucose through photosynthesis by plants. All right, so they enter the food chain through photosynthesis right here. But plants are also consumed by animals, so carbon dioxide from plants, okay, are also converted back, or in this case, back into a different living system, in this case plants, by consumption, meaning eating. So animals eat plants, and the consumption then basically breaks down the carbon that's in plants, and that carbon then gets incorporated or assimilated into animals. So now that carbon that was from plants now becomes part of animals. Okay, so how do we recycle that? Well, through decomposition. So again, bacteria and fungi will actually help us break, once we die, all of those carbons that are actually in our body then gets broken down, and they return back to the abiotic realm. Again, the atmosphere, the air, the waters, and the landmass in this case. Okay, now there's other ways that carbon can actually return back into the atmosphere or into the abiotic realm, and that's through respiration, which is actually done by plants and animals. Okay, and also, as well as combustion meaning burning of these carbon-based compounds. Okay, FYI, fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal actually come from living materials. That's actually why they're called fossil fuels. Fossil meaning old, degraded, living things. All right, so that's the carbon cycle. You can apply this thinking in all of the other cycles presented to you in the PowerPoint slides, which is in your learning plan. All right, so you can apply this for the phosphorus cycle, for the nitrogen cycle, for the water cycle. Okay, so again, you just remember, okay, it all cycles between living systems, plants and animals, obviously, into the abiotic realm, which is primarily air, water, and the soil in this case. All right, the processes that they take to go from one to the other is not important, okay, except obviously for photosynthesis and respiration, but all the other processes are not. You do not need to know that in great detail. So why do we care? What is the nature of those cycles with our environmental problems? So now we're talking about the competency and the learning objective now of the what is the science behind our environmental problems. Well, there is this thermodynamic law, or a law of chemistry and physics, called the first law of thermodynamics, which means to say that matter, in this case carbon dioxide, is shown by this, okay, by all of these things, by this figure, is fixed. So there's a fixed amount of carbon dioxide, there's a fixed amount of oxygen, there's a fixed amount of nitrogen, there's a fixed amount of phosphorus. Okay, so you get the gist of that. But what happens is, let's look at this right now. In the atmosphere, there's 839 gigatons of carbon dioxide. Gigatons is 1 gigaton is equal to 1 billion tons, and 1 metric ton is equal to 1,000 kilograms. Okay, so just to give you an FY what a gigaton is, right? So what happens is, if let's say this decreases, this goes down from 839 to 820, it has to go somewhere else. Okay, it just doesn't disappear into space, although it could, all right, hypothetically speaking. So if this goes down to 820, right, the 19 gigatons has to go somewhere, and that has to go either to the, obviously, to the permafrost. Okay, it has to go to the surface ocean, into the deep intermediate ocean, okay, or the continental crust. Again, this is the biggest storage area for carbon dioxide. You can see it's 122,576,000,000 gigatons. Okay, that's a lot of gigatons, right? And so if permafrost is, we're talking about, in this case, glaciers. Okay, actually we're talking about the North Pole and the South Pole, places that have been, in this case, almost permanently frozen because of some climate change. What happens is, when these things actually melt, the 1,600 gigatons of carbon dioxide will obviously escape into the atmosphere. All right, so the take home here is, when one goes up or one area goes down, those decreases and increases has to go somewhere else. All right, they cannot just disappear into thin air, literally and figuratively. And so a very, very important thing is actually there's a goal, and the goal for climate change, okay, for us to have less than 2 degrees is actually around 1,100 to 1,500 gigatons. Okay, has to be emitted into the atmosphere. So this is fixed, 839. Right now, if you add this two together, it's 385 and 185. So once we hit 1,100 to 1,500 gigatons of release into the atmosphere, scientists have said that there's actually going to be a probable 2 degrees Celsius increase in the Earth's temperature, which is obviously going to affect everything again. So this is the reason behind